Boom, we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. Just a quick little update and read over some ideas. Was very excited last night. Fun to see Bitcoin back around $18,000, peaking into the trading range. Now, ultimately, I'm long-term bullish on Bitcoin and crypto, just in general, like value proposition for decentralization of power through money and governance and identity. Super important if we're ever going to make it as a freestanding society moving into the future. Freedom of speech is included in that. So this brings us to what I was really excited about last night, aside from just general fervor. Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Robert Malone were reinstated back on Twitter. Now, I've been pretty quiet about my thoughts in this space. I've tried to elucidate the potential of where I thought we might be going through some of the studies that we looked at, like the one with John Ioannidis, and how most of scientific studies are false. But this brings us to the conversation of fraud. With Sam Bankman-Fried, we have the South District New York Attorney General's Office, which I basically believe is the Department of Justice. Count one, to commit wire fraud. So I'll read this out. I don't want to get lost too in the weeds because I'm not a legal representative. So because I'm not a lawyer, I'm going to read this as a simpleton here. But count one, conspiracy to commit wire fraud. So from at least or on around 2019. So what's that? First off, we should be charging the SEC with fraud, because why do you need everything to break before you go look? Like, you should just be looking kind of actively in general. You should, if you're going to be a regulator, you should be regulating proactively instead of retroactively. And everything we've seen from the SEC basically is a retroactive use of power. And that doesn't do anything useful for anybody. Like, we know that. That doesn't do anything useful for anybody. He's going to go to jail, yay, but nobody gets their money back. Or if they do, it's like maybe 10 cents on the dollar, a penny on the dollar. But ultimately, this is good news. This means that there were enough people that weren't connected to that criminal pinky we were talking about, who are now might be under the light here to some degree, shape, or form. Like, everyone always talked about Sam's parents. Oh, these regulators, and they go to school and they know regulation. And Gary Gensler's friends with his dad, and they're in the financial committee house brother. Like, uh-oh. So we've seen this before. This was, in the scientific discussion, we kind of started off with our hoorah about, like, I haven't been as excited for anything as I was when Robert Malone and Dr. Peter McCullough came back online. It felt like a win for our sports team. I'm not a sports fan, but that one, I was like, yes, I'm a fan of data and science. And one of the difficult parts here is, if you're dealing with fraud and you're dealing with criminal activity, you want to make sure you get the head of the dragon instead of its pinky or like its toe, and be like, ha ha, we got the dragon. Meanwhile, the enemy is still lurking around, and there's a lot of potential things here I think we're going to want to keep an eye on. So we're going to actively engage the story of Sam as he goes to court here. So count two, wire fraud on customers. Okay, we can agree with that. Sending money to Alameda when you're thinking you're sending it to FTX and using Alameda as an intermediary. Alameda's not a bank. It doesn't have the capability to do that. So yeah, that's a pretty clear violation, I think, which is probably why they're trying to really, quick, let's snap up banks and reorganize order flow. That's likely the case. Okay, so count three, conspiracy to commit wire fraud on lenders. Okay, so this has to do with pretense. Okay, I'm gonna read a little bit deeper into this count three here, because I think it'll help give some example of what the rest of this sounds like. This was in part object to the conspiracy that Samuel Bankman-Fried, aka SBF, the defendant, and others known and unknown, knowingly having devised and intending to devise a scheme to artifice, to defund, and for obtaining money and property by the means of false or fraudulent pretenses, misrepresentations, promises, and would and do transmit and cause to be transmitted means of wire, radio, and television communication, interstate foreign commerce, writing, science. This means all of the media conversations that went into raising money around a fraudulent company. What we saw with the Theranos girl is that sometimes we put way too much faith in a demographic or an idea of a person, like this person we want to see successful, and we believe in them even though they're lying. And once they start lying, it's impossible to get them to come back to reality, because if they admit to the first lie, that's game over. So both of the early part of this, and we're going to see, what I think we need to recognize is that, and what has been most difficult now, is that it's on the other party's burden to show proof that this is not a conspiracy at some high level, because all of the onerous now is in that side. Before 2020, it wasn't clearly obvious, although there were paper trails and you could tell what some of these things were doing, like what the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization was doing in the background. Some of them were really not good, like papers you would never suspect to read. And again, this is because I have such a deep love for science. This is not a science channel. I'm only here to talk about crypto, but in effect, if you can disrupt the academic conversation around what truth is, you can get away with fraud. And we've seen this used readily in our conversations today, which is, oh, we're going to change the definition of what this thing is. Used to mean sterilization, used to mean that you would never have X or Y or Z, but now it means this new thing. And we do this with words quite frequently, but truth is a little bit more difficult to bend over a long period of time. So anyways, we go on to count 4, wire fraud on lenders as well. That's okay, it's a multiple count here on wire fraud. Conspiracy to commit commodities fraud. Okay, there's a whole bunch that could go down here. The spot trading that they were doing with things like AMC, we're gonna find out. Hopefully we get a deep dive on everything from this one. Count 6, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Again, deeply connected to trading aspects. I could see how this could get dangerous for our little ecosystem though. One of the difficult parts is regulators will step in and they'll remove the capability of the average participant because of regulations, right? So the reason why you couldn't easily buy $12 a month of Netflix stock over the last 10 years is because there was no railways for you to do so. And that's very disempowering to people, effectively, right? Because had you given them the opportunity to also invest instead of just spend money at the company, and there was some micro transaction that they could take part in instead of all this massive, extraordinarily expensive regulatory framework that gets in the way of that happening. We've had that take place in the crypto sector already with automated market makers and the ability to spin up tokens and whatever you want to use them for. You can build utility instantly with a lot of this stuff, right? If you already have a commodity or a community-based product, this makes a lot of sense, especially for the video game sector. So you already have digital products and digital coins being sold in multi-billion-dollar companies. So it makes sense for these to be products, not securities, regardless of what the price speculation might be. The same way we see with CSGO, guns and weapons within there, the Counter-Strike game. So the problem here is that even though I agree there's likelihood that these committed some serious fraud and are connected probably to a much bigger criminal enterprise that's sitting in the background, because Sam looks clearly like a pawn, I don't think he's smart enough to understand the conversation around ivermectin. I don't think he is. I don't think Greta Thunberg is smart enough to understand the conversation around climate science, okay? So because of this, you have very useful idiots you can put into place. It makes sense. I mentioned this last night, but it looks like Sam's parents maybe even sacrificed him. Like, look, maybe we can get you like 10 or 20 years worth of jail. You'll come out with like an extra $1 billion. Like, I don't know. These people are weird. Okay. That was count 6. And this is just from the Department of Justice, I believe. I think the CFTC has also released one too. So that's a few different agencies that are now looking into Sam. And you're also going to find conspiracy to commit money laundering. Count 7. Now, we could get into the way their relationships worked with Ukraine. Who knows? This is going to be a very interesting web for them to try to unspin. And count 8, conspiracy to defraud the United States and violate campaign finance laws. Well, first off, that's a pretty oblique and opaque area. This is a difficult one, because a lot of the campaign finance laws don't make sense for the community or for the people. The fact that you have corporations that can lobby the government to get liability shields from prosecution is fucking absurd. It doesn't make any sense. So when you're like, oh, conspiracy to commit fraud against the fraudulent thing, I'm just like, oh yeah, this is the SEC needs to be, we need to be researching the fucking criminals behind the pinky finger of FTX, because it looks like a USAID, it looks like a CIA front fucking slush shop for moving funds around. And if we're really gonna make it through this dilemma, if we're gonna see the true face of the enemy that's committed some of the most heinous acts on the human civilization, probably over the last 100 years. Like, they've gotten away with it consistently, right? This is not the first time the United States has itself committed war crimes. I mean, we have treaties, we have international treaties in place, we have things that we set up as a human civilization that was supposed to be there to help protect individuals, to give them the freedom of choice, to believe in the random shit that they want to believe in. All sorts of stuff that have dated back a very long time. From the Magna Carta to the Constitution, we've constantly tried to instill this idea that there is a necessity for reverence in the individual's choice for something. Because often we'll get caught in this consensus echo chamber and bias. Even the Jewish tradition is like, hey, you know what we're gonna do if 11 people are agreeing, or if 10 people are agreeing, the 11th motherfuckers, you gotta disagree like there's no tomorrow. Because we need an argument, we need a debate, we need a debate about all things. You should need to be able to have an argument that you believe the earth is flat, even though I strongly disagree with you. And that's important. That discourse is one of the most important fundamental aspects of our growth as a society, because when that gets curbed and squelched, we miss out on the most explosive potential in the growth of the human species and civilization. Because people like Ignace Samuel Wise, the guy who was like, hey, you guys gotta wash your hands, you keep actually killing more patients than you're saving because you're just going from one sick room to the next. We didn't yet know that, and they outcasted this individual for this very simple, oh, the germs are this invisible spirit thing, hey? What are you, a witch doctor? And this is the problem. Our society has done this time and time again throughout generation, throughout government, throughout every aspect over the last 1,000 years. What we need to do is recognize these internal faults and try to highlight them as part of our society again, which is the need for freedom of choice, freedom of expression, and freedom to say whatever crazy shit you might want to, because just like Dr. Robert Malone, Dr. Peter McCullough, and the countless other people who are banned on Twitter due to this consensus behavior of a PhD in like gay data, we block some of the world's most credible voices from speaking. And this isn't the first time. Anyways, it looks like Sam's going to jail for quite a long time. That's a lot of counts. That's 8 counts. It sounds like someone went and fessed up before he got a chance to. Maybe that's what Caroline was doing in New York. Anyways, I'd love to hear all your guys' thoughts, questions, comments down below. It's a beautiful day. You can see where the sunglasses too, because otherwise I just got shade in my eyes. Now it looks like I'm cool. Whatever. I love y'all, Bear family. Happy early winter solstice, my favorite time of the year. We've just pulled out of the Taurid meteor stream. We're finalizing that beautiful journey through one of the most dangerous times on this planet. Pretty much every October to November, we go through a giant cosmic shooting gallery and play a game of Frogger with giant space rocks floating at hundreds of thousands of kilometers a second, flying straight towards us. So we're lucky to be here on this miraculous thing called life. Appreciate it, but also don't be afraid to dig into the things that are not difficult to deal with. Anyways, Tea with the Arcane Bear. We'll see you in the next one.